My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 43 years old. And for 37 of those years, I've carried a secret so impossible that even I questioned my own sanity. I was raised by a Sasquatch, not metaphorically, not in some fever dream my traumatized child brain invented. I spent 6 years of my childhood living in the wilderness of Northern California with a creature that science says doesn't exist. He fed me, protected me, taught me to survive. He saved my life. But what I discovered last year about how I ended up in those woods, about who my biological parents really were, destroyed everything I thought I knew about my own story. This is the truth, all of it. The parts that haunt me and the parts that still make no sense. I'm telling it now because I'm dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 8 months, maybe less. I refuse to take this to my grave. Let me start with what I know for certain. Confirmed facts. On September 14, 1987, a 6-year-old girl went missing from a campground in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. Search parties combed over 40 square miles for 11 days. They found nothing, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing. The case went cold. That girl was me. What the searchers didn't know, what nobody knew until I emerged from the forest in 1993, was that I hadn't wandered off and died of exposure like everyone assumed. I'd been taken. Here's where the confirmed facts end and my memories begin. I need you to understand something. I was 6 years old, traumatized, alone. The human brain does strange things under those conditions. I've spent decades questioning whether what I remember actually happened. But the physical evidence doesn't lie. The calluses on my feet when they found me, the muscle development in my legs and back, the parasites in my system that only exist in certain elevation ranges, the healed fractures in my ribs that showed signs of being deliberately set. Someone, or something, cared for me in those mountains, and I remember his face. The night I disappeared started like any family camping trip. My parents had driven up from Sacramento for a long weekend. I remember the smell of pine needles and campfire smoke. I remember my mother's laugh, high and nervous, as she tried to roast marshmallows without burning them. I remember my father's voice, low, angry, talking to someone on the bulky cell phone he'd brought, even though we were supposed to be unplugging. What I didn't understand then, what took me 30 years to piece together, was that my parents weren't taking a vacation. They were hiding. But that revelation comes later. First, you need to understand what happened that night. I woke up in the tent around midnight. My parents weren't beside me. I could hear them arguing somewhere outside, voices sharp but muffled. The words didn't make sense to a 6-year-old, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear. I crawled out of the tent to find them. The campfire had burned down to embers. The forest was darker than anything I'd experienced in my suburban life. I called for my mom. No answer. I walked toward where I thought their voices were coming from. 10 steps, 20. The trees swallowed me whole. By the time I realized I was lost, I couldn't even see the glow of our campsite anymore. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. Black trees, darker shadows, the sounds of things moving in the undergrowth. I did what any 6-year-old would do. I sat down and cried. That's when I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, something massive moving through the brush toward me. I should have screamed, should have run, but I was frozen, watching the darkness shift and separate until a shape emerged that my child brain couldn't process. It was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb the moonlight. The smell hit me next, earthy and animal, but not unpleasant, like wet leaves and something muskier underneath, and its eyes. This is the part nobody believes. The part that makes people think I invented the whole story to cope with whatever really happened in those woods. Its eyes were kind, not hungry, not predatory. It looked at me the way my grandmother used to look at me when I'd fallen and scraped my knee, concerned, gentle. It reached toward me with a hand the size of a dinner plate. I should have been terrified. Instead, I reached back. The creature, I would eventually call him grandfather, the closest translation I could manage for the sound he made when referring to himself, carried me through the forest that night. I don't know how far. Miles, probably. I remember the rhythm of his movement, the surprising warmth of his body against the cold mountain air, the way his massive hand cradled me against his chest. When I woke up, I was in a cave, not a small hollow in the rocks. A genuine cave system carved into the mountainside, hidden behind a waterfall that I would later learn concealed the entrance completely from the outside. The interior was dry, surprisingly warm, and absolutely massive. And I wasn't alone. Grandfather was there. But so was another creature, smaller, probably around 7 feet tall, with lighter brown hair streaked with gray. A female, I realized later, his mate. I would call her grandmother. For the first few days, I did nothing but cry and sleep. I was terrified, hungry, desperately missing my parents. The creatures watched me with what I can only describe as patience. They brought me water in cupped hands. They brought me berries and roots I was too scared to eat. On the 4th day, hunger won. The berries were sweet. The roots were bitter but filling. Grandmother made a sound when I finally ate, a low rumbling that vibrated through the cave floor. It took me years to understand that sound. She was relieved. Here's what I know now, confirmed through decades of research and 3 different anthropologists who've studied my case confidentially. The creatures that found me weren't operating on instinct alone. They made a deliberate choice to take me, feed me, shelter me. The question that still haunts me: why? Why would a Sasquatch, a creature that has survived for thousands of years specifically by avoiding human contact, adopt a human child? I have a theory. It's not confirmed, but it's the only explanation that makes sense of what happened next. Grandmother had recently lost a child of her own. I found the grave 3 weeks into my time in the cave. A small mound of rocks near the back of the cavern, decorated with wildflowers that had long since dried. The size of the mound told me everything. An infant, maybe a toddler, recently buried. When grandmother saw me standing near it, she made a sound I'll never forget. Not the rumbling relief from before, something higher, thinner, grief, pure and unmistakable. She touched the stones gently, then touched my hair. Her eyes moved between the grave and my face. I was 6 years old, and even I understood what she was telling me. You're not a replacement, but you're a reason to keep going. From that moment, something shifted. I wasn't just a strange creature they were tolerating. I was being integrated into their family. Grandfather began teaching me, not with words. Their vocalizations were complex, but my human vocal cords couldn't replicate most of them. Instead, he taught through demonstration how to find water by following certain plants, which mushrooms were safe to eat and which would kill me, how to move through the forest without making sound. He taught me to survive. Grandmother focused on something else: comfort, warmth. She would hold me during cold nights, her massive body generating enough heat to keep me alive through conditions that should have killed a 6-year-old human. She groomed my hair, picking out tangles with surprising delicacy. She made soft sounds when I was scared. She loved me. I know how that sounds. I know attributing human emotions to a creature we don't officially acknowledge exists seems like projection. But I've spent my entire adult life studying animal behavior, primate communication, emotional intelligence in non-human species. What grandmother showed me was love, and what grandfather showed me over the following years was something that changes everything we think we know about these creatures. He showed me their society. 3 months into my time with them, grandfather took me deeper into the mountains. We traveled for 2 days, moving only at night, until we reached another cave system even more elaborate than the first. I wasn't prepared for what I found inside. There were more of them, a lot more. This is no longer my personal memory. This is a data point that could reshape our understanding of an entire species. I'm stating clearly, I cannot confirm the exact number, but my best estimate is between 20 and 30 individuals. A community, a tribe. They had structure, hierarchy. The largest male, bigger even than grandfather, seemed to hold a leadership position. Younger males showed deference to older ones. Females cared for children communally, sharing nursing duties and supervision. And they communicated. Not just the vocalizations I'd heard before. They used gestures, facial expressions, even crude drawings scratched into the cave walls. I watched two of them have what I can only describe as an argument, complete with aggressive posturing, back and forth vocalizations, and eventual reconciliation through physical touch. They were people. Not human, but people. I stayed with that larger group for several weeks, though time had become slippery by then. No calendar, no clock. Just the rhythm of days and nights, hunger and fullness, sleep and waking. The other creatures accepted me with varying degrees of curiosity. The children were the most fascinated, young Sasquatches roughly my size who would approach cautiously, touch my hair, smell my skin, then retreat giggling in sounds remarkably similar to human laughter. One young female, probably around my age in developmental terms, became something like a friend. I called her Shadow because she followed me everywhere, mimicking my movements, trying to teach me to climb the way she could. I couldn't keep up. Human children aren't built for scaling vertical rock faces. But I tried. That's when I had my first accident, a fall that should have killed me. 20 feet onto stone, landing wrong, feeling something crack in my chest. I blacked out. When I woke up, Grandmother was there. My torso was wrapped in some kind of plant material, bound tight enough to restrict my breathing, but not so tight I couldn't function. The pain was extraordinary, but I was alive. This is confirmed by medical examination years later. 3 of my ribs were fractured in that fall, and they healed correctly. Not perfectly, but correctly enough that I didn't die of internal bleeding or punctured lungs. Something in that cave knew basic medicine. Something set my bones and kept me still long enough to heal. The implications of that still keep me awake at night. I lived in the mountains for 6 years, 6 years of learning their ways, eating their food, sleeping in their caves, 6 years of watching seasons change from the mouth of a cavern, snow giving way to spring, giving way to summer, giving way to fall, and back again. I grew. By the time I was 12, I could move through the forest almost as quietly as them. Almost. I could find food, purify water, build shelters that would keep me alive through a mountain winter. I could understand probably 60% of their vocalizations and communicate back using a combination of sounds and gestures. I was no longer fully human. I don't mean that mystically. I mean it practically. My feet had developed calluses thick as leather. My senses had sharpened. I could smell rain coming, hear movement from hundreds of yards away. My posture had changed to accommodate moving on uneven terrain. I'd adapted. But something else was happening too, something I couldn't articulate until much later. I was starting to remember. Not the life before the forest, that had faded to fragments, faces I couldn't quite see, voices I couldn't quite hear. What I was remembering was the night I disappeared, and those memories didn't match the story I'd told myself. I remembered my parents arguing. I remembered walking toward their voices. But now other details were surfacing. A third voice, male, aggressive, a sound like a slap. My mother crying. Someone else had been at that campsite. The memory felt important in a way I couldn't explain. But 12-year-old me, living in a cave with Sasquatches, had no way to investigate. That would have to wait. What couldn't wait was the decision Grandfather made in the spring of 1993. A decision that would end my life in the mountains forever. Something was wrong. I noticed it in the way Grandfather moved, cautious, constantly scanning the forest. I noticed it in the increased security around our cave, the way we stopped traveling to see the larger group, the way Grandmother kept me close even during daylight hours. They were scared. At 12, I didn't understand why. At 43, having spent decades piecing together historical records, I know exactly what was happening. The government was searching. In early 1993, a logging company reported unusual findings in the Shasta Trinity region. Large footprints, strange vocalizations recorded by their equipment, hair samples that couldn't be identified. Within weeks, federal agents were in the forest. Officially, they were conducting an environmental survey. Unofficially, and this has been confirmed through FOIA requests I filed 20 years later, they were hunting. Not hunting to kill, hunting to capture. Project Atlas, they called it. a classified program investigating anomalous primate populations in North American wilderness areas. It had been running since 1967, triggered by the famous Patterson-Gimlin footage that mainstream science dismissed as a hoax. The government knew it wasn't a hoax. They'd known for decades, and now they were closer than ever to finding the exact community that had raised me. Grandfather made his decision in April. I remember the conversation, if you can call it that, vividly. He sat me down at the cave entrance, just the two of us, and made a series of sounds and gestures I'd never seen before. He was telling me I had to leave, not because he wanted me gone. I could see the pain in his eyes, the way his massive hands trembled as he tried to explain. He was sending me away because the searchers were getting too close. And if they found me, a human child living with Sasquatches, everything would change. They would never stop hunting. I refused. I actually refused, throwing a tantrum like the child I no longer really was. I belonged there. That cave was my home. These creatures were my family. Grandfather waited until I exhausted myself. Then he showed me something that ended the argument. Photographs, crude printouts, probably stolen from a camp. I never learned how he got them. Images of a man and woman who looked vaguely familiar. A picture of a young girl with my color hair, my color eyes, missing person flyers. I'd forgotten I had another family, another life, another name I couldn't quite remember. Grandfather was showing me that someone out there was still looking for me, and that if I stayed, I would die in these mountains. Either from the hunters getting too close, or from a life that, no matter how much I'd adapted, my human body was never truly built for. He was letting me go because he loved me. Grandmother wouldn't look at me when I left. She stayed deep in the cave, making that thin keening sound I'd heard only once before, at the grave of her lost child. I was her second loss. Grandfather led me through the forest for 3 days, traveling routes I'd never seen before, until we reached the edge of something I'd almost forgotten existed. A road. He pointed toward the sunrise, made a sound that meant safety. Then he touched my face with one massive finger, tracing my features like he was memorizing them. And then he was gone. I was found 4 hours later by a park ranger who nearly crashed his truck when a feral-looking 12-year-old girl stumbled out of the tree line. What followed was chaos, medical examinations, psychological evaluations, media circus. The story of Miracle Sarah, the girl who survived 6 years alone in the wilderness, made national news. Experts debated how a child could possibly survive that long without help. I never told them the truth, not because I didn't want to, because the first time I tried, still delirious, still half wild, a man in a dark suit visited my hospital room. He asked very specific questions about what I'd seen in the forest, who had helped me, where they lived. Something in his eyes told me to lie. So I did. I said I'd survived by finding a cave, by teaching myself to forage, by sheer luck and determination. A miracle child. A survival story for the ages. The man in the suit watched me carefully. I don't think he believed me, but he couldn't prove otherwise. I was returned to society, placed with foster families, since my biological parents were no longer an option, a fact everyone carefully avoided explaining to me in detail. I spent years relearning how to be human, how to use utensils, how to sleep in a bed, how to interact with people who didn't communicate through gestures and growls. By 16, I could pass as normal. By 18, I was starting to ask questions. Questions about that night in 1987, questions about my parents, questions that no one wanted to answer. The official story was simple. My parents, Daniel and Rebecca Whitmore, had died in a car accident 2 months after I disappeared. Grieving, distracted, driving too fast on a mountain road, case closed. I believed it for years. Then, in 2019, at 41 years old, I finally got my hands on the full police report from my disappearance. What I found in those files changed everything. My parents weren't grieving vacationers, they were running. Daniel Whitmore had been an accountant for a construction company in Sacramento. 3 weeks before our camping trip, he discovered his employer was laundering money for a criminal organization with ties to drug trafficking and human smuggling. He'd copied evidence, contacted the FBI, been told to lay low while they built a case. The camping trip wasn't a vacation, it was witness protection on a budget, but someone had found them anyway. The police report mentioned details that never made the news, signs of a struggle at our campsite. Blood on the tent fabric, type matched to my mother, tire tracks from a vehicle that didn't belong to my parents, and most damning, 2 sets of adult footprints leading into the forest, only one set coming back. My parents hadn't died in a car accident 2 months later. That was the cover story. The real truth was buried in a classified FBI file I only obtained through a journalist contact who owed me a favor. My parents had been murdered that night. Their bodies were never found. The official car accident story was fabricated to close the case without awkward questions about organized crime, federal failures, and a missing child who might have witnessed everything. I hadn't wandered off because I was a restless 6-year-old. I'd run into the forest because I was fleeing from the men who killed my parents. And something in those woods had found me before the killers could. The implications took months to fully process. Grandfather hadn't stumbled upon a lost child. He'd seen something happen at that campsite. He'd watched men murder 2 people and hunt for a third. He'd made a choice to intervene. He'd saved my life. Not through accident or animal instinct, through deliberate action. He'd seen humans committing violence and decided that the small human fleeing that violence deserved protection. What does that tell us about these creatures? They understand human behavior. They recognize danger, malice, innocence. They make moral judgments. They choose. That choice reshapes everything we think we know about intelligence, about consciousness, about the boundaries between human and animal. If a Sasquatch can recognize murder and respond with compassion, what else can they understand? What else do they know? And what does it mean that they've chosen for thousands of years to hide from us? Maybe they've seen enough of human violence to know we can't be trusted. Maybe they watch us from the shadows, understanding far more than we realize, and have decided that remaining myth is safer than becoming fact. I can't say that choice is wrong. In 2020, I tried to go back. Armed with GPS coordinates I'd reconstructed from memory, satellite imagery analysis, and 30 years of research, I returned to the Shasta Trinity Wilderness. I hired a guide who didn't ask too many questions. I brought supplies for 2 weeks. I found the waterfall. I found the cave behind it, empty, not abandoned recently. The dust, the animal droppings, the collapsed sections of the interior told me no one had lived there for years, maybe decades. They'd moved on. I searched for 3 more days, found nothing, no tracks, no vocalizations in the night, no sign that the community I'd known had ever existed. Maybe the government searchers had gotten too close after all. Maybe they'd relocated deeper into wilderness that even I couldn't penetrate. Maybe, and this is the theory that hurts most, they'd died out. Disease, habitat loss, simple attrition of a population too small to sustain itself. I'll never know. What I do know is confirmed by the physical evidence. The cave existed. The waterfall existed. Something had lived there, modifying the interior in ways that natural erosion couldn't explain. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. My family was real. I made one more discovery before my diagnosis, one final piece of the puzzle that I'm still trying to understand. In 2023, going through my late foster mother's belongings, I found a letter. Addressed to me, dated 1994, never sent. It was from the man in the dark suit, the one who'd visited my hospital room. His name was Agent Thomas Brennan. He died in 2018. The letter was apparently part of his estate, forwarded to my foster mother by a lawyer who didn't know what else to do with it. It contained 3 pages of typed confession. Brennan had been part of Project Atlas. He'd spent his career hunting Sasquatches, trying to capture one for study. He'd been responsible for driving them from traditional habitats, for separating families, for at least 2 deaths that he attributed to containment complications. He'd also been the one to interview me in that hospital room. The letter said he'd known immediately that I was lying, that no 12-year-old could survive 6 years alone in the wilderness, that I'd clearly been cared for by something. He wrote that he'd let me lie because of what he saw in my eyes, not fear, not trauma. Love. I loved them, his letter said. Whatever they were, wherever they'd taken you, you loved them, and they must have loved you to let you go. I've spent my entire career treating these creatures as targets, specimens, anomalies to be captured and studied. You showed me they were something else. You showed me they were people. He'd buried my case file, retired early. Spent the rest of his life advocating quietly for wilderness protection in regions where Atlas had identified Sasquatch populations. The letter ended with an apology. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I was part of a system that treated your family as monsters. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell the truth when it might have mattered. All I can do now is tell you that your secret is safe, that I never reported what I suspected, that somewhere out there, whatever loved you enough to raise you, to protect you, to let you go, they're still free. That's my gift to you, the only one I can give. Stay safe, Sarah. I don't have long now. The cancer is progressing faster than expected. The doctors say weeks, not months. My affairs are in order. My story is recorded. This document, plus hours of video testimony, plus every scrap of evidence I've accumulated over 40 years. When I die, it all goes public. Not to sensationalize, not to trigger another government hunt, but because the truth matters. Because people deserve to know that the wilderness still holds mysteries we haven't solved, that intelligence, emotion, and compassion exist in forms we haven't acknowledged, that the boundary between human and other is far blurrier than we want to believe, and because grandfather and grandmother deserve to be remembered as what they were. Not monsters, not myths, parents. I think about them every day. I think about grandfather's hands, so capable of violence, choosing gentleness. I think about grandmother's grief, finding purpose in protecting something small and strange and helpless. I think about a community that took in an alien creature and taught her to survive. I think about what my life would have been if those killers had found me first. Some nights, when the pain medication lets me drift, I dream I'm back in the cave. I'm 6 years old and the darkness doesn't scare me anymore. I can hear grandfather's rumbling breath. I can feel grandmother's warmth against my back. I can smell pine and earth and home. Safe. I was safe there, in a way I've never been since. Here's my final theory. Unconfirmed, unprovable, but the only thing that makes sense of everything I experienced. They didn't save me by accident. They didn't take me out of curiosity or confusion. They took me because they recognized something. A child without protectors, a small creature hunted by larger ones, a life that would end without intervention. They saw themselves in me. Creatures who had spent millennia hiding from humans who would kill or capture them. Creatures who had lost children to violence and accident and the harsh indifference of the wild. Creatures who understood, in whatever way they understood anything, what it meant to be vulnerable. They saved me, because saving helpless things is what family does. And for 6 years, they were the best family I ever had. I'm going to ask something of whoever reads this, whoever watches the videos, whoever inherits this story when I'm gone. Don't hunt them. Don't send teams into the wilderness with tranquilizers and cages. Don't treat this as a mandate to capture and study. Don't turn my family into specimens. Instead, do what they did for me. Protect them. Leave them spaces where they can live without fear. Accept that some mysteries don't need solving, that sometimes the most profound act of respect is letting the unknown remain unknown. They're out there. I'm certain of it. Maybe not in the Shasta Trinity anymore, but somewhere. Watching. Waiting. Choosing every day to remain hidden from a species they've learned not to trust. Maybe someday we'll earn that trust. Maybe someday we'll prove we can encounter something different, something strange, something that challenges our understanding of the world and respond with wonder instead of weapons. Until then, let them stay in the shadows. Let them stay safe. Let them stay family to each other, the way they were family to me. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 43 years old. I was raised by Sasquatches for 6 years. The creatures who saved me showed me more compassion than most humans I've ever known, and the truth about my biological parents, murdered by men, covered up by governments, only proves what grandfather already knew. Humans aren't always the heroes. Sometimes, we're the monsters. And sometimes the monsters in the woods are the only ones willing to save us from ourselves. This is my testimony, my truth, my gift to whatever world exists after I'm gone. Thank you, grandfather. Thank you, grandmother. Thank you for finding me, for raising me, for loving me. I never forgot. I never will.